Welcome to Sentinel Interviews, now here at the Access Humboldt Community Media Studio in Eureka. And with us today is a very special guest, the Director of Community Development Services, Kirk Girard. Kurt, thanks for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
So, Kurt, you're the feature, the North Coast Journal's cover story today, and you've been the
Yes,
subject
I
of quite a bit of media attention.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to bring you in to let folks know who the
Don't
real...
let the headline throw you on the North Coast Journal. I don't know if you read the headline, but...
Well, you know, love and hate are always an ample supply here in Humboldt County.
No, there is.
But I wanted to see what makes the real Kirk Girard tick, and what brought you to Humboldt County in the first place?
It's kind of an interesting story that I was given an assignment when I was in 7th grade in Virginia to pick a college that I might be interested in attending. And I researched all over the United States and picked Berkeley and Humboldt. And didn't know that I was heading to California, but Humboldt had always been in the back of my mind because I had done that assignment. You had to pick the school and say why you wanted to go there and look at their course catalog. So I actually ordered a course catalog from Humboldt when I was in 7th grade, 3,000 miles away. But it was because I was interested in forestry. And when I finally came here, I wasn't interested in forestry anymore. It was mostly the school. I studied environmental resource engineering, and the area, just the natural environment really drew me.
And I know ERE, that's pretty much the toughest course you can take at Humboldt State. A lot of engineering students up there go through 6 or 7 years.
Yes, it is. Call it a stiff program. Yeah, and I started there in 1980, and the professors, they really felt like they were onto something. At the time, it was one of the only environmental resource engineering programs in the country, and they thought that studying energy and water resources, waste resources, was, one, they had a bit of a chip on their shoulder. They wanted to be engineering. They wanted to be accredited by the National Accreditation Board. But back then, environmental engineering didn't have anywhere near the stature that it does today. And you could tell it was a part of something that was new and going to be big. The professors really had a lot of ambition for the program. And with the chip on their shoulders, they made everybody work very hard so that you could come out of the program with a solid foundation in environmental resources and engineering. And a lot of people that graduate go on to get their professional licensing, like in civil engineering typically. So it's a combination program. You learn civil engineering and you learn a lot about environmental resources, biology, whatever your area of interest might be. Mine was energy and water.
And so what was it that inspired you about delving into, I guess, our country's energy use and how that might begin to change over the years to become more in tune with the environment?
Yeah, you might recall our first energy crisis was back in the 70s. And
or two of them, right? 73 and 79?
That's right. And 79 coincided with, when I wanted to start education and a career. And it was the same call to arms that we have today: energy independence, alternative sources that are more sustainable in the long run. And there was really some cutting-edge development at that time in photovoltaics and solar thermal and passive energy, and I was interested in all those things.
And so coming out of college, you didn't go into government right away, right?
No. I was always interested in the private sector. I was interested in international development right out of college. And I worked for an outfit that designed and built a pump that ran on photovoltaic panels well before its time. And they hired me to try to sell into the USAID, or an Agency for International Development, market. So I got to run a U.S. branch of a company that's based in Canada, and design systems and sell these photovoltaic pumps into the development market for village water supply, stock watering, that type of thing. So I had a dream job right out of school. Got to live in Arcata, but I did work on projects all over the world. And 2 years into it, our founders learned that there's a lot of need in the third world for photovoltaic pumping. but not a lot of money. And after we kind of tapped the limits of the formal aid market, the money ran out and the company went under.
And of course, in the early to mid 80s, a lot of the funding for alternative energy kind of dried up from the federal side.
That's true too. That's true too. Although we weren't depending upon the, we really, our market was not going to be in the subsidized market, but that's kind of got us going. It's just there's a tremendous need in the third world for a lot of technology, but if it's not the right technology and affordable, it just isn't going to find a place. And that was a hard lesson learned by that company. But I went from there to working in engineering. Still worked for Jack Selvage at Selvage Heber Nelson, and that was my first real local job in full-time job. I actually worked for Pacific Gas and Electric when I was going to school, and I worked for the Center for Appropriate Technology at school too.
Were you one of the CCAT co-directors?
Yes,
okay.
I was. Yeah, I was one of the co-directors the first year that the program got started in the Buck House. So when I go back there, I don't know if there's a term of endearment, but I had a student tell me once, probably about 5 years ago now, I walked in and he said, "Oh, that's Grandpappy CCAT." I said, "Grandpappy CCAT?" but yeah, I was one of the initial co-directors in the Buck House, which was a great experience. But I went to work for Jack, and there was a turning point there after I left school that I really decided that I wanted to live in Humboldt permanently. And I was always interested in traveling and international affairs and development, but I thought I could keep a base here in Humboldt and keep my interest alive elsewhere beyond the county. And I managed to do that in a variety of ways. But my professional career in Humboldt started with Jack, and he was just starting the environmental branch of Selvage Heber Nelson at the time. Marty Lay, I think, was their very first hire to work on environmental issues, and I think I was the second. So I trained under Tim Theis initially in subdivision design, and then started to work on environmental programs, including solid waste. And I stayed with Jack's outfit for about 3 years.
That's more commonly known as SHN Consulting, right?
Sorry, yes, now it is. And then I went to work for NorCal Waste Systems, which is the company that owns city garbage. And it was at the time when they were just learning how much the Cummings Road landfill was leaking and the size of the groundwater contamination problem there.
And that's when Humboldt County actually had its own local landfill.
That's right. That's right. And NorCal owned that landfill, the Delaware County landfill, and then 2 landfills in southern Oregon, one of which is the landfill that Humboldt County is using today, Dry Creek landfill. So I was an environmental engineer hired to manage the regulatory programs of those landfills and determine how to fix the problems they created and how to operate them so they didn't create as big of problems in the future. And you want me to keep on going? Is it sort of a chain of my job history here?
I mean, a lot of local folks and younger folks, I think, have no idea what the history is with why we ship our garbage hundreds of miles away to either Anderson in the Central Valley or up north to Oregon.
Well, the short answer is we get a lot of rainfall here, and there's one thing that don't go well together. It's an open solid waste landfill and a lot of rainfall, because it's almost impossible to make them leak-free. Mm-hmm. So it does make some sense to ship our garbage to drier locales where the leachate from the rainfall that goes through the garbage doesn't get into the groundwater, because that is what happened to Cummings Road landfill and pretty much every other unlined solid waste landfill in the country. But in Humboldt, we pumped a lot of rainfall through our garbage, and it created a plume of contaminated groundwater almost 3 miles long, and created a problem for residences. The Crystal Springs Bottled Water Company, for example, drew water off the aquifer that was eventually impacted by the landfill. So sorting all that out was a problem, and designing a system or a way that the landfill could be closed with the least amount of impact was one of my jobs.
And is that contamination problem still there?
It is, but actually we did some interventions that dramatically reduced the problem and made it so that it would get better and better over time. We basically dried up the garbage, much more so than it was. It's still a soppy mess down there on the bottom, but it just doesn't pump as much contaminated water into the aquifer. And part of it's people that, this is maybe a plug for the environmental engineering program. There's one of the professors in the program keeps track of environmental resource engineering jobs that have stayed here locally. Mm-hmm. And every year he usually sends out an email to all the alum, say, what are you doing? You're still here in Humboldt, what work are you doing? And it's remarkable the number of people that go through that program and then decide to make a go of it here. And the expertise that they bring to the the jobs and the innovation, there's a lot of cutting edge environmental work done here. I'll say it's the engineering program, but that goes for a lot of the resource programs at Humboldt. I mean, you know that, and a lot of the other educational programs. You were in poli-sci and economics, so right. You guys play your role too.
Oh, certainly. And we were just up at HSU for the ribbon cutting the new Schatz Central home.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So I've always, the work that I've done here. The education was fantastic, and the colleagues that are still here locally, and the level of innovation, the level of sort of cutting-edge development of environmental technologies, it's always been enchanting. And I do travel a lot. When I worked for Louisiana Pacific, maybe getting ahead of myself, I had an opportunity to go to places all over the United States and in Louisiana Pacific's operations, and meet a lot of my colleagues that were kind of in the same business and other sectors. And you might think if you go to the East Coast, you might be wowed by the technology, the level of thinking, and I always came away thinking, my goodness, we're really at the center of a lot of thinking about environmental engineering and technologies and approaches. So it's been a very rich place to have a career, even though it's a small area.
So we're not just out here on the frontier, in other words.
We are, but in a real positive sense. And if you think about it, much of the world has sort of moved in our direction, where environmental engineering, you don't have to explain it to people anymore, or concepts of sustainability, are sort of are part of just the credentials of being a responsible company anymore in the United States and worldwide. And that people may have taken that for granted, but that's really not how it used to be in a lot of places in the United States. But it's always been a part of really the Humboldt creed, if you will. Not that it's not bred a great deal of controversy, maybe the headlines in the papers. In a sense, we have that wellspring of thinking and technology and approaches embedded in a community that has always learned how to apply their blood and sweat to the land and generate prosperity. And one of our most significant clash in this community is the blending of the thinking about sustainability and sort of long-term protections of the environment with the need to allow yourself to have the freedom to invest in your property and create wealth from it. And the timber industry and the fishing industry, ranching, are all people that have been successful and built the original culture in Humboldt, maybe not the native culture, but the original European culture, by having the freedoms to use their land creatively, resourcefully, and create wealth. In a sense, they're the people that built the foundation of the community. So then you have everything we were talking about in terms of some of the thinking about how we are able to create wealth without sacrificing long-term environmental needs. And we're, in a sense, a living experiment of how we really blend those two parts of our culture. And those are the kind of conflicts that we have to deal with all the time. And one of the reasons that not so much me, but our work is in the headlines, because we're in the, right in the middle of that, call it resolution of those points of view.
Well, it sounds like those two sides have come together in your own professional career. You just mentioned Louisiana Pacific. What was it you did with them?
I was the director of the environmental program and the safety program for the Western region, which was a big region. LP was divided up into 3 regions, nationwide, and the Western region was primarily California, but we went into Mexico and up in Oregon, even out towards Colorado. But I didn't manage the environmental programs for the forestry, the logging sides, but I was in charge of all the manufactured plants, the environmental programs for all the manufactured plants, like the Samoa pulp mill, all the sawmills, the oriented strand board and panel board facilities. Bob Simpson was a general manager, and he was Harry Merlot's godson. And Harry was the president of Louisiana Pacific, and he hired Bob to manage the Western region. And there's various stories about this, but Harry was considered sort of the bane of environmentalists when he was initially the president of Louisiana Pacific. He acquired old growth and cut them. A lot of people felt like he didn't use sound logging practices, sort of a cut and run sort of approach. But Harry really did find religion at some point and decided that he was going to distinguish the company as being an environmentally responsible company. And Bob Simpson was the person that he hired to sort of play that out.
And is that when the pulp mill converted?
As a matter of fact, yes. And that pulp mill was singular in the sense that Harry really wanted to make his mark on the pulp industry. And that's why he set off on what then was an absolute radical direction to eliminate chlorine from the bleaching process. And Bob hired me and said, we want to distinguish ourselves from an environmental perspective. And within 2 to 3 years, with almost unlimited resources provided by Louisiana Pacific, we just, we developed, and I say we, when I originally started, there was only 3 people working in the environmental resource program at Louisiana Pacific. And towards the end, there was, I think, 17 in our group, and almost half of them were HSU graduates deployed at all the various regions within the Western region to manage, like 2 or 3 different plants. And we developed environmental systems so that each plant had a compliance assurance program. So for air, water, toxic substances, transportation, we knew that we were running according to the regulations. It's a great project and great job, and felt like we got a lot of credibility within the company with the managers and the staff of Louisiana Pacific. It was an really exciting time for the company. And LPs continued along that vein, and they really do, make a big point. Again, it seems almost quaint, because what timber company now wouldn't really put, environmental controls and sustainability at the forefront of their strategy? But back then, that was not what was typical in the industry, and it was cutting edge.
Yeah. Since then, Bob's had a bit of a heartbreaking time trying to get the evergreen pulp restarted.
Right. Bless his heart, because he still has passion for that work and those efforts, and he was an absolute leader. The LP came on hard times with the failing of the oriented strand board products. Harry Merlot was asked to leave. They've pulled out of California. Bob's still, though, wedded to some of the original, designs that he had when he was a general manager of LP, and that was his effort to sort of resurrect it, is to manage that pulp mill. But the market and our position in the world market for pulp just isn't there anymore. It's it's a sad state of affairs, but beyond our control.
So was it when you were an LP that you were asked to join the Arcata Planning Commission?
Actually before that, because I was on the Arcata Planning Commission for 10 years. I started on the Arcata Planning Commission when I worked for the photovoltaic pump company, because I worked in my house alone all day, and I was really getting starved for human contact, quite frankly. And I thought that I was, I really loved Arcata. It was a good, public service job, but I hadn't been that interested in land use issues prior to that, but I was really keen on Arcata. It was a really exciting time in Arcata's life too, when they were just starting the community forest and the marsh project, and I just kind of wanted to be close to all that activity, and the Planning Commission was the best way to do it. So predated that quite a bit. But I stayed with Arcata Planning Commission while I worked at Louisiana Pacific, which wasn't easy because I would typically work 50, 60-hour weeks, and almost half my time was traveling. Mm-hmm. But I didn't want to give up the Planning Commission job because I really enjoyed it.
So is that what really first gave you a taste for the government or the regulatory side of the equation?
Yes, working on the private sector side, that I used to have to apply for permits from the Humboldt County Planning Department for the Samoa operations, coastal development permits, that type of thing. So I was a customer of the Planning Department from my private sector role.
And did they just turn the screws on you and just make your life really miserable?
No. Not that I didn't have my disagreements with some of their interpretations of the code, but I'd say we worked cooperatively. Steve Warner, who is still our supervising planner that supervises the planning permitting process, I gained a lot of respect for him when I was working for Louisiana Pacific, and then when I came in and joined the organization, I better understood why I respected him from the outside. So no, there wasn't conflict there. I had a lot of ideas, though, about how the permitting process could be overhauled from the outside. And the first 2 years that I worked at the planning department, we implemented a lot of those ideas. So our first streamlining evolution, but quite frankly back there was a bit of a revolution, came from a lot of the ideas that I brought from the private sector. But not enough. You got to keep on going, and we have. But there was a great deal of change that occurred in that 1998-2000 in how we went about our permitting programs.
Well, what kind of state was the department in after your predecessor, Tom Conlon, there?
Well, I'll tell you, the department was in somewhat of a state of shock because, as was indicated in the article today, it's now ancient history, but Tom Conlon's departure was really controversial, and I think Tom enjoyed a lot of support from within the organization, and the fact that he was removed, somewhat abruptly, and some people say unfairly, really shocked the organization. And quite frankly, they were worried about the hire because, this guy's never been a planning director, he's never been a planner, and he's being asked to run our department. So they were really nervous about me being selected, coming from the private sector. There was very much a mood in the air that the department needed really deep reforms, and if not a good cleaning of the house, because that was the controversy that was really in the air at the time with Tom's departure. The grand jury had done some very unflattering reports. There was a group that was formed that was called the PRC, and I think it was the Permanent Reform Committee, that was a group of developers and builders brought together to determine what changes should be made in the permitting process. And wouldn't call it a participatory process, that it was more prescribed, thou shalt do this. And the staff was somewhat reeling by, quite frankly, some of the reform ideas were misguided, that they didn't fully recognize the framework that a planning shop has to work in, particularly state law. And so it was a department that had been battered considerably.
And essentially some of the disagreements you're saying had to do with people not liking CEQA more than not liking what the county was doing.
Well, I think this is the big picture. The big picture is the land use framework in California has evolved to the point where it is too complex. It is too burdensome. It's a collection of rules that are applied, in most cases, statewide to deal with what most people feel are the obvious negative effects of development that the rest of California has experienced. And if it's a crazy patchwork of state law, court decisions, special interest groups vying for advantage by establishing, processes and rules that may or may not, support their interest.
The state initiative process plays its role in that.
State initiative process.
Prop 65.
That's right. And so the system is bloody well broken. And I don't think that people, would say it isn't. But the ability to change is it's easy to say change it. It's much, much harder to actually accomplish it because it's rooted in law, and what happens is that every planning department, in a sense, is tasked with making the system work to the best of their abilities, and it is imperfect. So local people, what do they see? We are the face of the system. It is imperfect, and they criticize us. In some cases, the criticism is warranted because we should have it absolutely fully mastered, not make mistakes, and have it work as flawlessly as it possibly can. And that's what we strive for. But it is an ugly system at its heart. And one thing that is true about it is it was developed in a large extent to deal with very big problems, the congestion in Southern California or even the Bay Area, the consumption of agricultural land that really has been dramatic, the destruction of wetlands, and if you think about it, I say that it's broken, but it's a system that really did, in the face of just tremendous economic activity in California, preserve, to the extent that it has, California's most beautiful resources. So, it has been a clash of interest, a patchwork of rules, and applying it locally, as complex as it is sometimes not easy.
Is it fair to say it's a lot of LA problems getting matched with LA solutions, then getting imposed on places like Humboldt and Mono County and so forth?
I think that there's definitely some of that. And I'll say this is, but we're playing it out ourselves on our local rulemaking, in that a good portion of our population came from those places, and they look at development as being responsible for destroying what they loved best about their place. And what about Humboldt County? We all love this place across the political spectrum. And so they fight to make sure that our ag land doesn't get consumed, and that our wetlands are protected and our natural habitats are preserved, and that the aesthetics of the area is protected. And you tell them, what? We have plenty. What's going to happen? And they say, we've lived through it. I lived in Long Beach before the crush, or I lived in El Dorado County when it was truly still a rural county relying on timber and agriculture. I can see how these things change. So they actually say we need this public interest framework to prevent the sort of deterioration that the rest of California has suffered. There is universal angst about the land use regulatory permitting system in California, whether you're in Eureka, whether you're in Sacramento or Los Angeles, because it is hugely complex. And the people that it's hurt the most, in a sense, and is in rural areas, because the complexity is so much that if you're an individual landowner and you want to do a project and your focus is on the project, the permitting complexity has gotten to the point where you almost should hire an expert to handle it. The evidence that we are required to put in the record to make defend a permitting decision, either to the general public or ultimately to, say, a judge if the decision is challenged, is prescribed by law and is more of a product of the fights that have happened in the rest of the state. And it is beyond a lot of people's ability, or it's out of proportion to their interest and their capabilities. And so we've almost professionalized the business of trying to determine whether or not your project is something that the community wants, and if so, how should it be designed to meet community interest and still, meet your own project objectives.
So from a developer's perspective, this whole process has been really good at creating jobs for government officials and for consultants and for lawyers.
And I think that that's true. And that's the part that I was sort of lamenting, because we are a very small piece of a much larger history of land use laws and requirements and court precedents, all of which we have to bring to bear in the work that we do to make it defensible and, quite frankly, legal.
So given your background in the private sector, do you think you were hired on with the hope that you would be somebody who would be their advocate, who would kind of see things from their point of view in terms of reforming the department?
No question. Yeah, not to go back to the North Coast Journal article, but the question was asked, did you really know what you were getting into? And the answer was, no, I didn't. But after the first few months, I started to understand much more so that quite frankly, the level of interest in the outcomes of all of our processes, how much we could potentially affect people's, quite frankly, wealth. And the gravel industry was a very controversial sector at the time, and it was instrumental in having Tom removed. And that was when a lot of people here locally were waking up to the fact that most of our rivers really primary use was for mining aggregate for local business, and that industry had been allowed to do that for in perpetuity since we started using gravel for roads. And some people went to him and said, "Wait a minute, you're mining gravel in our wild and scenic river. What's up with that?" And there was some really huge clashes at the time. And the gravel industry representatives that originally that talked to me, basically said, "Look, we got the last guy down the road, and that'll be your fate too if you don't, protect our interests." And they said it just like that in meetings that I went to, and I was sort of like, "Oh, Jesus, is this how it works?" Excuse my French.
Well, and is that how it worked pretty recently? There was a pretty contentious series of meetings with the Board of Supervisors where you yourself were on the agenda.
Yeah. And I think that's right. And really, what the bottom line was is their industry's vitality could rise and fall based on the regulatory decisions that were made. And that's when it was like, oh, so these are the regulatory roles of our department. And me realizing there's a lot of gravitas here, and people's wealth and well-being and livelihood is at stake based on the outcomes of these regulatory processes. And that's when I started to realize, really call it the weight of the position, and in the interests that are at stake in this. I think the general plan is really a case in point that this county has a lot of really significant issues to resolve, and how we resolve them will affect people's livelihood. Excuse me.
So why has the general plan taken this long to get through the update process? It's stretching back from the year 2000 now, 11 years.
Probably the biggest reason is the amount of resources that we've thrown at it. If you fund the general plan at really high levels using consultants, which is the norm for most jurisdictions, then you can really compress the time frame. We haven't had the luxury of doing that. When we started the process, really it got off the ground in 2000. We did have extra funding, and that lasted for 3 years, and we actually used a consultant. We got through what was called the critical choices phase, which is what's important to us to address in this general plan. And then the county had one of our first, it's been a cycle, but one of the huge budget cutbacks occurred in 2003. And we lost the supplemental funding for the program. So at that point, it was the advanced planning budget that you've got is what you're going to have to use to continue the general plan. So we brought the project in-house and used our existing staff and worked on it as much as we could with the resources that we had. The other is this county is very interested in participation, and I know we've taken a lot of flack that people haven't felt they've had an opportunity to participate. And some of that rightfully so, because people's participation will only span 1 or 2 years, and most recently, the last 1 or 2 years have been in the Planning Commission hearings. And the opportunities for public input are you submit your comments in writing, and then you come to the hearings and you provide your testimony. And so you sort of speak to the decision makers, and that's by design at this stage. It's in the hands of the decision makers. They want to hear your opinion. They're going to make their calls, but that isn't considered sort of rich opportunity for public participation. That's not your workshop participation. That's not us coming to your groups and having sort of back and forth discussions about your interests and how you might, what alternatives you'd like to see.
It's 3 minutes and sit down.
Precisely, very sterile in a lot of ways. If you look at the whole arc of the general plan process, we've had, literally hundreds and hundreds of meetings and participation by thousands, but a short snapshot in time, it may not appear to be that rich. But the length of time is regrettable. The one other thing I was going to say is our general plan is very comprehensive. It's taken a lot of people's views, tried to optimize them. There's a lot of different policies. And then finally, we've added quite a bit extra to our plan, like the water resources element is a new element, not that common in California.
Or the telecommunications element.
Telecommunications, right down your alley. We have work on energy. We have a standalone energy element. We have an economic development element.
So right away the developers are screaming, sitting there at home, why do we need new elements that nobody else in the state or very few jurisdictions in the state use? Why don't we just stick with what we know?
I'll say it really does come from the pride of Humboldt County and people saying, so what? Humboldt shouldn't have a water resource element as critical as water resources to our future, or Humboldt shouldn't have a telecommunications element because, so it's asked in the sense of why wouldn't we know where we were going? Why wouldn't we know what resources we really want to protect? Why wouldn't we want to clarify the rules that people play by? And when you frame it that way, it's natural to want a plan in place for these important aspects. Say, for example, the economic element. We really should know what our objectives are for our economy and understand what steps we might take to get there, what policies might affect the ultimate economic wealth and well-being of the county.
So economic development was put under your department's jurisdiction during your time there. Is that something you wanted, or is that something they had to find somewhere to throw it into?
Well, quite frankly, I was asked to solve a problem back then because the county had been operating some state grants. And because they weren't well staffed, the county had applied for grants for people that weren't a part of the county. But the county didn't provide the staffing to do the proper administration, and the county got on a blacklist for CDBG grant applications. And I was asked by the CAO, could you please look into this and try to get us back in good stead with the state? And that led to us taking over the economic function. At the time, it was just one staff person and a few troubled grants. But the intent behind that was, and this is something that I appreciated, again, my private sector background, just managing a regulatory program, building regulations and planning regulations as a means to develop this county is not enough.
It's mostly negative, saying what you don't want.
Exactly right. And the economic development was an opportunity to try to grow those aspects of the county that we really did want to grow and not just say no to. So I thought that was a much better blend and approach, and that was the community development models. And so that's what led to the economic division, the housing programs, the infrastructure development programs, and the workforce programs. And then ultimately the last one that was part of our community development was the natural resources programs. So those are all programs where it's not about saying no. It's about working with local partners, determining really what programs this county needs, what assets we want to develop, and then going and getting state and federal money to help us and our partners implement those programs. And that has been a very non-controversial part of our work. And quite frankly, some would say certainly by budget, a much more significant part of our work.
Although most of that budget is grant funded, right?
almost all of the funds associated with Economic Development Division and the Natural Resources Division, actually, I can say this, the general fund does not support those activities. That's all grant funded. And it's a simple formula. We really do work with partners. You know, you've heard some of the programs, Prosperity Program, Targets of Opportunity Program. You know, we develop a plan, identify projects, and then use those plans to apply for state and federal funds. We've gotten a very good reputation with our state and federal funding agencies for handling the money well and then delivering on the goods.
Well, everyone loves so-called free money, even though, of course, it is tax money, you know, if you get right back to it. But
yes.
I'd say the Headwaters Fund has not been something free of controversy, and the grand jury did point that out in its most recent report.
Yeah. It's interesting. The work of the Headwaters Fund Board hasn't been controversial, except maybe it's funding for the widening project, advocacy for the widening project in Richardson's Grove. But the management of the program has had some detractors. Often what we found is that the people that critique our regulatory programs and the general plan update sort of spill over to some of the other programs that are managed under in our shop. And I'm not saying that, you know, that we haven't been blameless, but unfortunately some of those programs have been caught in the net of the controversy. And but honestly, the work of the Headwaters Fund Board has been absolutely stellar, and the success of that fund amazing.
Well, they haven't squandered it, it's fair to say.
No.
They still have the same principal amount of money they had when they started it a decade ago.
Yes, and you look at the jobs created and the programs that have been supported by that fund, it's an amazing program.
Well, most people are happy with, say, the Open Door Telemedicine Center,
yes.
letting people access
Yes.
experts in medical field from afar.
That's right.
But some of the other things, like promoting direct flights to Salt Lake City, it's hard for working class folks to really see how that benefits them.
Well, let me tell you a formula that we've used for a lot of our economic development work is we will go to various, we call them industry clusters, and we'll say, what do you need? What do you need to grow? What do you need to add the next employee? You know, what's getting in your way? And we'll take that as a punch list of work that we've got to do. And I'll tell you, there's two things that come on the top of almost everybody's punch list. Workforce development. We want a group of workers that can really add value to our organization, and more flights out of the airport at better prices. It's almost universal. So that does explain, for example, trying to attract Delta to our area, hoping that once they get, you know, a beachhead, they might have a long-term sustainable, you know, flight program here.
And I took one of those cheap direct flights to LA. It was cheaper to fly to LA than SF, so I'm on
right.
board there.
Horizon,
you know,
same
because I've got
deal.
family there, of course.
Okay, yeah. So you know, we hear it all the time. You've got to improve our infrastructure. We can't be so isolated as a economy, or it's the isolation that's killing us. And why some of our most successful entrepreneurs, once they get to that critical stage of 50 to 100 employees and a volume of shipping, that it starts to not make as much business sense to be in Humboldt.
So if it's about transportation, what is Headwaters and economic development in a broader sense doing about A, the port, and B, the railroad?
I don't want to talk about the railroad. Quite frankly, we don't.
Is there a lawsuit or?
No. It's just, quite frankly, we don't see. I talk about, you know, what's the punch list that we're getting from current businesses? The railroad just isn't on it.
Okay.
It just isn't on it.
And not even the gravel mine operators? I know they want to reopen that one in the southwest corner of Trinity that feeds into.
You know, honestly, when the California economy picks up, we might see that pressure again, but we haven't seen that for some time because the building industry is in such a doldrums. But still, it is the airport, the airport, the airport. The STAA access, I know that Richardson's Grove is somewhat controversial, but you have to look at actually what's proposed on that project to determine if it really would harm the gateway to the community, which we all want to protect. And really something that is fundamentally economically sound with the port. like short sea shipping, or the potential that there might be manufacturing jobs shifting from Asia as their wages increase and come back to the United States, and we have some marine-dependent manufacturing that could land here. Those are, that's the promising, but that's even a mid to long-term, development potential for the port. I think really the strategy is still that there are businesses that are successful here. We have an amazing amount of startups, of new entrepreneurial businesses and specialty food and finance and manufacturing. Grow those. They are working. Connect them to markets. That's the essence of the strategy, I think, is just expand the successes that we know we can create.
In terms of telecom, obviously we're getting that redundant fiber.
Finally.
It's coming over Highway 36.
Yes.
But what about its deployment in the community? I have to notice these Humboldt County buildings don't even have free Wi-Fi. I mean, gosh, even Arcata can come up with that.
Get with it, right? That's true. That's true. I think one of the things that I'll say is county efforts are hugely underfunded, and I know that can be controversial. But if there was a major change in going from the private sector to the public sector, in the private sector, if you had a good idea that could make money, there'd be resources for it. And you can have a really good idea in the private sector, and there's no resources for it. You've got to figure out how to make it work however you possibly can, because it's not about the size of the idea and its potential for success. It's about the budget that you received this last year to meet basic services.
And money tends to follow itself. I mean, it's the experienced entrepreneurs that don't have so much of a problem getting capital access because they've already been accessing it.
Yeah.
So that's one thing I had to know, and I wrote up a brief report about it. This Headwaters Fund listening campaign that Ms. Ellsbury was recently on.
The 100 interviews. Yeah.
A lot of those folks were the same folks who are kingpins in the banking and real estate and governmental sectors. It's like, how much are you going to learn from the folks that you're already working with on a daily basis? Or are the new entrepreneurs in that list?
There was quite a few.
I know there was a few.
Yeah.
I know Corey Fitzhugh was on there, but by and large, it was a lot of the same old characters, I thought.
That's interesting. Well, we got a lot of new information. Really, it was very refreshing, I think, what we heard. One, things have changed in our community and economy, and it was a recalibration. If you don't think we heard enough from the entrepreneurs, because we need to recalibrate based on all the fundamental economic shifts that have happened in our country and to some degree here locally, we are coming up with a new plan. And we want people that are in business, making business work, to be at the heart of the plan. We call it our Industry Leaders Council, and that are going to be operating business managers. So we really do try to embed that work in the people that it can benefit and know the most about it. And with this next update of the strategic plan, the economic development plan, we are putting them by design sort of at the center.
So an update of prosperity is coming up.
That's right.
But that's separate from the general plan.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so in summary, trying to go after that general plan update process, trying to kill it in some cases, how is that really going to be benefited, that agenda, by getting rid of you? Because essentially, you could pack up your family, move to Fiji tomorrow, and the Planning Commission every Thursday, or pick your favorite resort spot. But the Planning Commission seems like it's got a momentum of its own. It's just going to keep grinding forward whether you're there or not.
Well, for better or for worse, my face is the face of the general plan, because it's our department that's leading the effort. And I mean, we're all human, right? It's a lot easier to criticize another human than some abstract concept of trying to blend our community's interests so that we have some agreement about how we should move forward as a community. And if you feel threatened by the direction that I might be moving forward, you could say, I feel threatened by the direction of moving forward. The more human reaction is I don't like the process, I don't like the people, and I don't like the policies. All three you cover. and that's why I am a target. It's because this plan does ask our community to some tough questions, and it is going to potentially affect the balance of public and private interests. If I can be discredited, it would spill over to discrediting of the entire plan. and potentially slow its momentum or stop it altogether. And I say that because it's a really common tactic as communities are going through general plan update processes, is to see if an argument can be made that the director should be fired, and by association, pause or change the general plan, change its direction, change its leadership, change its direction, can kind of go hand in hand.
But of course, the real leadership is the Planning Commission, and there's been some significant recycling
Well,
there.
at this point, it is all Planning Commission. They have, you know more than anybody, every Thursday night for 2 years, count them, that commission has gone over the plan line by line. It really is theirs. And at this point, it is them to present to the board for ultimate decision making. Staff's role in this has been, has been almost insignificant, except in our discussions with the commission about sort of the merits of their policy directions when they've asked us. It has been a commission process, and it is a commission document at this point, where they have the governance chapter and the safety chapter and the map workshops this weekend, and the plan is done through the Planning Commission, which is pretty remarkable. I mean, I know looking back, we would have loved to condense the time frame because it would have kept most of the people that are involved able to see it from the start to the finish. And they've been deprived of that, given the length of time it's taken. But we're there. We're almost to the end now.
And of course, these planning commissioners, they're not compensated. They're all serving up there as volunteers, right?
No, and I know very few planning commissions throughout the state that have went to 4 meetings a month to get a general plan done. They do 1 project meeting and 3 general plan meetings, but it's an extraordinary effort, and they're going to, devoting next Saturday to the effort too. So kind of heroic on their part, but like you said, the product shows the results of their work. For each policy, they've typically had 1 or 2 or sometimes 3 options to consider. The plan that we have now, one plan that represents what might be considered the environmentally preferred alternative, one plan that really represents, call it the private property rights alternative, and they're actually trying to blend and mix, almost on a policy by policy and standard by standard basis. This final combination of interests that we have in the community, and so it's really a wonderful product, and not that there's still things that the board is going to have to ultimately decide, because we had split votes on a lot of the real key issues, which you could imagine, but the work that they did and the quality of the product that's come out of it is pretty remarkable.
And it seems hard to pigeonhole these folks. It seems like they find unusual, otherwise seemingly unusual areas of agreement.
They do, yes. There's been some remarkable common ground that everybody's commented on both sides of call it the progressive and the conservative spectrum, and they really haven't come at it. The beauty of our planning commission is it's not driven by ideology. It's not ideologue. Some would say this person or that person represents these views, but honestly, as a body, most policies and standards get a fair shake in terms of the perspective on it. You've been there. You've seen it.
Well, we've definitely seen a turnover. 3 new commissioners in the last year.
Yes.
2 of whom directly appointed by the 2 new supervisors,
yes.
Sumberg and Bass. It doesn't seem like the direction of the commission has really veered off any particular course just because of that change.
You couldn't tell. You couldn't tell. We don't know any given night how things are going to go. We really don't. And that's a good sign that everything gets argued for its own merits. This commission has done something really a great practice, is that they've asked the people that are closest to the issues to come and talk to them or fill out the alternative charts. You've seen these alternative charts for each policy. What do you think? Well, the people that are closest to the issues have been generating their own alternative charts, and the Planning Commission will say, okay, what does the Working Land Group say about this, and what does the Humboldt say about this? And people that really are following these issues closely are taking the time to actually mark up individual policies and standards, and the commission gets to sit there and go, okay, well, here's all the views of the community right in front of us in real time as they're making their decisions. So I think that part of it has worked well, and a lot, led to a lot of really close deliberation.
So final question: What does it mean to someone who never turns into Access Humboldt Channel 10 and actually watches some of these Planning Commission hearings? At the end of the day, when they come out with their document, when the Board of Supervisors gets their chance to tear it apart, what is the general plan 2012, I guess it's going to be? What is that going to mean for the people living here in Humboldt County? How is it going to affect their lives?
Ask yourself what you really love about this community, and it's a fascinating exercise to do that in a group here in Humboldt. And if you were to average the results of that question, the plan is intended to see to it that we do that and better in the future. And it cuts across everything from, what our communities will look like, where we put housing, how we get between housing and our workplace, what views do we protect, what is going to be the quality of our rivers, how do we interface with the outside world in California, what sort of job opportunities that we have. The number of decisions that are made on a daily basis in this county that either takes us a little bit towards our goals or a little bit further away. It's just astounding at so many levels, and of county government even, never mind our relationship to state and federal agencies and the actions they take in this county. It provides us the identity that we can share with the world and ourselves and move us in that direction. And I can't understate that it comes back to preserving really what we do love about this place and making it better, and that's something we all hold dear to our hearts.
Well, in the interest of promoting that kind of community dialogue that hopefully Humboldt County will continue to be known for, this has been Sentinel Interviews. I'm Charles Douglas, and my guest has been Director of Community Development Services for Humboldt County, Kirk Girard. Thanks so much for coming in.
All right, thank you.